I'm going to address a broader perspective than the one piece of the puzzle that was being asked about. The request was to talk about and explain shame. And, over the years, many people have asked, why is this happening to me again? And the question comes, and people, spend so much time trying to figure out, in our codependence work, one of the things we point out is that the number one pseudo-solution of the non-being mind, that is the mind that's based in hostility and fear, is if I could just figure this out. And so they say, why does fear or hatred or shame or guilt or grief, rage, sadness, intimidation, why do they rear their ugly heads in me? Well, there's a really simple answer. You don't have to figure it out. Those things rear their heads because they're in you. If they were not in you, you would never feel them. You could not experience them. If you recognize them happening in yourself or others, it's because the brain cells are there that hold that content. The root of all of what people would call the destructive or negative emotions is fear. It's interesting, in the ancient scriptures, they talk about fear the same way that they would address the casting out of a demon. They said, perfect love casts out fear. Now, that's an ancient scriptural idea, and yet many who purport to be talking from the scriptures will put forward the thought that fear is the beginning of wisdom, especially fear of love, fear of the Creator, which is just such foolishness. But is a product of hearing about things that bring healing, but not being willing to do the work of healing, being distracted by things. I was talking to a gentleman this morning who's been engaging in his work, in fact shared with me that he, at a certain point, he's actually doing the codependence intensive. He's called into the show a few times, but he shared with me that he had some stuff going on. I said, well, how are the worksheets going? Well, it's really busy right now. I used to play soccer and the soccer championships are on, world games, and they're here and they're there. And it's like, The things we can do to distract ourselves. We had a conversation about bread and circuses. The Greeks figured out, they got to the understanding that, if you give people bread and circuses, you fill their bellies and you give them entertainment, something that's probably irrelevant to their lives, but you give them entertainment, you can distract them and convince them not to do the work of healing. And when people don't do the work of healing, but they engage in what they think are understandings, they come up with silly things like the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Now, I've had many people, when I bring that up, go, oh, well, but you see, they don't really mean fear. They mean, so if they don't mean fear, why do they say fear? Don't buy the con. If they're saying fear, the reason they're saying fear is because they're saying fear. That's what's going on. Now, they may have, when confronted, why would you promote fear in the name of love? And, a man who, if you go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, and I forget what the count was, but I think it was 15, 16, 17 times, the man says, fear not, 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 fear not. And yet, those who purport to represent him say fear is the beginning of wisdom, fear of love, fear of the Creator. I mean, how silly can you get? Pervasive fear is. And fear is a thought disorder that holds a belief that may result in anxiety, apprehension, and or dread of past experiences, of the present, and or future outcomes and events that may bring hurt, loss, or harm to self or others. So it's a thought disorder. To our thought disorders, elsewise they will play out, and unless we directly confront and deal with and change our thought disorders, those very thought disorders, when resonated into activity, will produce perceptions projected onto the people around us that massages our own thought disorder into a picture of someone else, so that we believe that someone else is responsible for that. So fear is the root of a whole range of emotions. And the reason is because fear limits intentions to those which are destructive. Fear limits perception to those which are threatening. Because it's a filter in the mind. Its activity filters out those things which are based in love. Filters out those things that are based in hostility. And so my offering would be, the reason that what was offered was perfect love casts out fear. They were saying that you have to be aware of how your mind operates. There's a filter over intentions called Rachma and a filter over perceptions called Kuba. And those two filters, when set together at the same time in the mind, were called perfect love. And at that point, the mind cannot produce a fear-based perceptual construct. So any time that fear comes up in you, as opposed to, fretting and thinking about how you're going to take care of something out there, the first order of business is to eradicate the possibility that your mind can produce intentions or perceptions based in fear, based in that thought disorder. Because until the thought disorder is worked out, anything that comes along and resonates that thought disorder, and the mind is going to produce intentions based in fear and perceptions based in fear. And perceptions based in fear are always threatening. Intentions based in fear are always destructive. And, I look at that information, and that's information that came together in over a period of years in putting together a course called Laws of Living and coming to understand how the mind operates. And I look at that, and it's just so simple and straightforward today. But why didn't you and I know that when we were in kindergarten? Well, Ari's 4. We have conversations with her about, well, here's what fear does to you. Gee, I notice there's hostility going on. Here's what hostility does. Did you know you could have had Rachma instead? Did you know you could have stayed connected to love instead? And because we weren't given that knowledge from the beginning, which I think should be kindergarten conversation, people have spent years and years and years and decades and lifetimes and generations producing perceptual constructs based in hostility and fear that are totally and completely fabrications of their own minds. but because of the qualities of energy involved, set up and draw to themselves experiences, build perceptions of people out of those energetic patterns unresolved, and believe that those things belong to someone else. So one of the first things we want to do with this work is to recognize that fear is not designed to be a part of human life. Now you look at just how much of the world works on fear. I mean, just turn on your television set and look at the fear-based advertising. You know, when I get an email, a PR email from a company that, you know, has a big title that has a presumption that I have some sort of a disease, I write back to them and ask them to take me off their mailing list because I'm not interested in their pronouncements about my diseases, quote unquote. But it's fear-based marketing. It's so massive in the world. It's so massive. Why does it work? Why has it grown to be so strong? Because most people have been so brainwashed with it from the earliest days of their lives and through their genetic heritage that that's one of the things that moves people. And yet it always moves people in an incorrect direction. It always moves people in a direction that will always produce an outcome that is undesired. And I've had people, you know, Jeannie and I, over the years, will talk about that and be like, oh, no, my fear serves me. It makes me take action. It makes me address, you know, and take care of things. Yeah, okay, I understand that your fear got you going or your anger got you going in a direction, you took a behavior, but what do you suppose if your intentions and perceptions were totally and completely based in love in that same arena? What do you suppose your level of power and accomplishment would have been if your mind was connected to active love? And your intentions or frontal lobes of your brain were connected to Rachma, and the back of your brain was connected to Kupa, so that everything that showed up in your mind showed up based in, linked to, connected to love. How much different do you suppose life could have been than being motivated by fear and hostility? I believe it was in the book Illusions, Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. One of the things the author says there, and it's an awesome book if you haven't read it, is argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours. How many times, Jeannie, have we over the years confronted somebody and it's like, no, I need my anger. And it's really time for us to recognize, too many times. It's amazing, isn't it, how people will fight for that and argue for that and tell you how great it is in their lives? It's mind-boggling. So, you know, the tongue-in-cheek line I offer is I could have had a Rachma instead. And it's pretty bizarre that we live in a culture that doesn't even have words to describe what that single word, and this man Yeshua 2,000 years ago, they asked him what's most important in the law, and he gave them a single word, and nothing like that word exists in our culture or the languages between the Aramaic and our English language, be it Latin or Greek. Nothing exists that represents the word that he used when they said, what's most important in the law? And he said, Rachma. It's the filter in the frontal lobes of your brain that keeps your intentions on track and connected to love and inhibits negative and destructive intentions from coming forward. And the reason it's important to keep your intentions on track with love and eradicate negative or destructive intentions is because intentions are the raw material of your goals. There's a lot of people out there talking about the power of intentions. Excuse me. An intention can no more cause a behavior than a shadow can carry a stone. Intentions are raw materials for that which drives behavior. And therefore, their quality is important. But you remember the people who understood, they said the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because intentions don't cause behavior. Intentions are simply raw material. Think about the raw materials of your home. There they are laying on the ground. Can you live in that? No. You have to build something out of it. Intentions are like that. They're just the raw materials. And when we understand how the mind works, and we recognize that those raw materials, those intentions, which have three different qualities. They're based in love, they're based in fear, which means they're destructive, they're based in hostility, means they're negative. Pardon me, reverse those. Hostility is destructive. Fear is negative. When you recognize that that's how your mind works, that's the raw material for your goals, then you make sure your goals are keyed to love. And when they are, the second filter in the mind, or the back of the brain, perceptual part of the brain, RACMA kicks in. And now the only units of perceptual memory that your mind can use to produce your guiding constructs, your behavior-driving realities, the only thing that drives behavior at that point is the guidance that comes from a mind connected to love. So fear blocks trust. It blocks intentions and perceptions fueled by love. And I'm spending time on this because every emotion that we put on the negative side of the chart is based in fear. They all follow. So this is a given. If you're going to address any other negative emotion, this needs to be the root of what you address. It has to come first. So intentions and perceptions fueled by love are blocked. And more importantly, contact and awareness of self as love are blocked by those thought disorders. So of course, if somebody says, well, what do I do about that? I'll say all of the above. I'll say, go back to the first radio show we did 11 years ago, listen to every radio show 5 days a week, an hour to 2 hours a day for the last 11 years, and the only thing you'll hear me talk about is what you can do about that issue. That's all I'll talk about, all 11 years, 5 days a week. But I did decide to come up with a mind shifter. So you've got worksheets to do, perhaps on fear. You might have some responsibility communication to do. You might want to do a love exchange. You might want to do the codependence worksheet. You might want to do the commitment. Each tool that you got is about addressing that. But one of the tools is a mind shifter. So if you recognize that there's perhaps some fear to work through for you, then I'm going to give you a moment or so to get your pen out to be able to write this mind shifter down. And this is a mind shifter specifically. And if you remember how a mind shifter is used, a mind shifter is a thought about an issue in your life or in which you have negative thoughts, and it's the opportunity to surface, process, and release the negative thoughts. So the way you use this, if you're new to the mind shifter tool, you take a piece of paper and you draw a line down the middle. The left-hand side of the page, you write the mind shifter. So if you get a page ready right now, your pen's handy, you got a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, you're going to write the mind shifter on the left-hand side of the page. And then when you write it on the right-hand side of the page, the right-hand side of the line you've drawn, you write down whatever thoughts come forward. And the idea here is that through resonance, when you've got the right mind shifter, everything that you need to process through will be resonated and start to come to the surface with that mind shifter. So word by word, thought by thought in a mind shifter, if it resonates something that's not based in love, then, and I suggest that, like, let's say if you're resonating with this conversation, then I'd say you take this mind shifter and you spend at least 3 hours. Your phone's off, your do not disturb sign is on the door, and you're in a quiet space and you're writing. So you write this mind shifter on the left side of the page, then write everything that comes up in response to it. And one of the most common responses that we get from mind shifters with people, the first thing that comes up is BS. Who are you trying to kid? You're crazy. That's not true. So now you start to engage your past in your mind. And through resonance, you open the veil. You allow whatever's there to come forward, and you, without censoring it, you just write whatever comes up. And when you run out of things to write, you write the mind shifter again. And then you write on the right-hand side of the page whatever comes up. And then you might write the mind shifter 3 times before something else comes up. Or you might write the mind shifter once and write 10 pages. And then what you do, once you've completed that 3-hour stint of working with the mind shifter, then you give it a little bit of a breather, maybe do some breath work because you've stirred some things up, just some still point breathing, and then you start looking at what came up. Most often people, especially when they first start doing mind shifters, are shocked by what's held in their own minds. They're shocked by what comes up. So here's the mind shifter. Hope you've got your pen ready. I trust that eternally present love. So you're writing this on the left side of the page. I trust that eternally present love renews my strength and intelligence moment to moment. Semicolon. It carries me as on wings of eagles. So I trust that eternally present love renews my strength and intelligence moment to moment. Semicolon. It carries me as on wings of eagles. And keeps my behavior aligned. Trust that eternally present love renews my strength and intelligence moment to moment, semicolon. It carries me as on wings of eagles, semicolon, pardon me, and keeps my behavior aligned so that life always holds future beauty and wonder for me as I heal. Content of my mind based in fear. Maybe we should change that just a little bit. I'm just adding this piece to it as we speak live. As I heal, all content based in fear and held by my mind. Got a little bit of a live edit here. So mind shifter for fear. I trust that eternally present love renews my strength and intelligence moment to moment. It carries me as on wings of eagles. and keeps my behavior aligned so that life always holds future beauty and wonder for me. As I heal all content based in fear and held by my mind. And notice if you're writing that down right now, what's happening with your breath. By the way, the shell of that, as I was doing some research on this topic, I ended up in Isaiah, and the shell of that mind shifter comes from the ancient book of Isaiah. They who wait for the Creator and wait there would be connect to love, shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles, and they shall run and not be weary, and walk and not be faint. That's where the shell of that mind shifter came from as I was looking at this healing of fear. So that's a starting point. And then the question that started this whole conversation out was on shame. What is shame? And we have an explanation for that, and I have a mind shifter for that. How shocking, right? So shame is a thought disorder based in fear related to self. So shame is a thought disorder based in fear related to self, a belief in brokenness and or inadequacy of self. So that would be my definition of shame. A thought disorder based in fear related to self, a belief in brokenness and or inadequacy of self. Now, when that thought disorder is resonated, it projects itself into all kinds of circumstances and situations. And it's akin to guilt, and sadly, guilt and shame, oftentimes people will shame someone or do a guilt trip on them, especially young people, children, are fed that in order to, a person, the adult thinks, to prevent that child from ever doing that behavior, that the shame has been instilled around or the guilt has been instilled around. When in fact the reverse happens. If an adult instills guilt or shame in a child to try to prevent them from doing a behavior, children work off of energy, and the energy that goes into the guilt and shame, the flare of energy, often becomes the very thing that attracts somebody to doing that behavior. And so guilt, shame, fear are energies to be eradicated. People say, well, but gee, if I didn't have fear, I might put my hand on the hot stove. Excuse me? You see, you have this thing called intelligence for that. Hot stove burn, I don't put my hand on it. I don't need fear for that. Produces all kinds of negative chemistry in the body, as does shame based in fear. And it's of no use whatsoever. It will just tend to keep the cycle of behaviors linked to shame and guilt and fear going in one's life. So again, shame is a thought disorder based in fear related to self, a belief in brokenness and or inadequacy of self. It produces painful warning signals of humiliation, dishonor, disgrace, and or distress caused by the real or imagined belief in having behaved wrongly, ignorantly, or foolishly. So as a whole package, shame, a thought disorder based in fear related to self, a belief in brokenness and or inadequacy of self, which produces painful warning signals of humiliation, dishonor, disgrace, and or distress caused by the real or imagined belief in having behaved wrongly, ignorantly, or foolishly. Healing shame leads to reconnection to self as love and restores me to the state of deserving. You heal that shame and you'll be restored to the state of deserving, because one of the other effects of shame is, I don't deserve. And we have a mind shifter for that. Surprise of surprises. So if you feel like there's some work to do around shame, you might want to work on this mind shifter. Again, I'd suggest at least a 3-hour time period of working with it. So the mind shifter is innocence and wholeness have always protected me. Presence of love. So innocence and wholeness have always protected me. Presence of love. Regardless of any charge that I or anyone has ever laid against me. Even if I did what I've been accused of. So this is meant to be that which will resonate anything in your unconscious or your genes that's based in shame, fear. Meant to resonate it, get it to come up to the surface, and then again, once you complete writing, 3 hours or so of writing, tool am I going to use for each thought disorder that I've touched into, each aspect of shame that I need to heal. So once again, the mind shifter for shame. Innocence and wholeness have always protected me through the presence of love. Regardless of any charge that I or anyone has ever laid against me. Even if I did what I've been accused of. That'll be a mind shifter that will help to surface anything based in that fear-shame game and give you the opportunity to process through it. And once you process through it, and remember that healing, processing, means that I hold love present when something less than love comes up. And when these thought disorders are exposed to active present love, literally the energetic impact of them dissolves. So, the circumstance that yesterday would have brought shame forward and a whole projection from the mind on self or maybe on someone else, shame. Once you rid yourself of it, that same thing can happen. It's just like, oh, yeah, I can remember, man, when somebody would say stuff like that, I used to go into shame. It's like, why doesn't it come up anymore? Because I've forgiven it. I've removed it. Remember, these things are not things that you're here to figure out. They're things that are here to be worked through, to be forgiven. And, reminding everybody, especially we've got people new attending the show, reminding that forgiveness is about how I remove what never belonged from my mind. And oftentimes that shame will be an inherited energy. Especially if there were abusive parents involved. With abusive parents, there's oftentimes a lot of shaming, a lot of making wrong, a lot of thought disorders spewed out of the power person's mouth at the child. That you're broken, you're bad, you're wrong, you're unfixable, you're not worthy. And, lest you decide you want to blame your power person, which is very likely a parent, If you went back, you'd find that the innocent child that they were subjected to the same buildup of thought disorders, and something as complex as this fear-shame thing that's been going on for dozens of generations to have the hold and the emotional grip and the pain that it has now. And so it's not something that probably most people are going to do. Oh, I'll do a worksheet and then I'll be done with it. It's something that takes consistent, persistent work to move through. I'd planned to do some other emotions, disorders, but actually I think with the timing that probably covers enough for today, and maybe we'll pick it up again tomorrow. We'll kind of see where things go. But we're down to about 10 minutes, so I'm going to open the gates for Miss Jeannie. Do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
We do not. It's all quiet. So we've got 9 minutes. Somebody press 1.
So if you're out there in listener land, what has this resonated for you? Is it making sense? Any place you disagree with it? Any place you need more clarity? Any questions about it? Anything, anywhere you need support? Remember that as you're doing the mind shifter, you want to make sure you keep your breath moving. Pay attention to your breath and keep it moving, because when a mind shifter appears, life kind of works like a mind shifter. Somebody shows up, resonates something painful, and most people just hold their breath and walk that energy down. You can't hold your breath and process through something simultaneously. So make sure to keep your breath moving, opening, and let this open and move in you. Again, our definition of processing is the ability or the act of holding love conscious, active, and present when something less than love comes up.